Professor Desai, thank you so much for joining us. What are you anticipating to be the top issues in this election?
Well, obviously, I think that how the election plays out will determine it, because one of the big unknowns for the election is whether we will encounter a new wave of COVID during the election campaign. So that will definitely be one thing. And so obviously the government, the Trudeau government, is clearly seeking to campaign on, essentially addressing all the needs, COVID, climate, of course, Indigenous issues and so on. And as we know, Trudeau has already been making announcements about, large amounts of funding on all of these fronts and more. So he's going to campaign on that platform. And then the NDP is going to say, well, if we've had a relatively decent performance in the pandemic, it's because of us. We made sure that the government would give certain types of relief and so on and so forth. So they will be making that an issue. So I think that those things will definitely be part of the election. I think for the rest, it really depends on how the campaign turns out and to what extent. I mean, I think on the whole, most parties are aligning in favor of more spending, including even to some extent, Erin O'Toole will line up against that. The other thing may be, really, depending on how it goes, I think other leaders may say, why did you need to call this election? After all, this is only like previous election was only 2 years ago. What was the point, etc.? So Trudeau will have to explain that. And of course, there is no doubt that he will end up with a hypocritical statement, because the reality is that what he's betting on is that right now the numbers look good. If he can escape a COVID wave, that he will do well in the election, his party will do well in the election, and he may get back the majority he lost last time. Yeah. That is his gamble. And Canadians, by the way, should know that if he were to get back the majority he had last time, we may not see half the promises that he's made being fulfilled, you see, in terms of spending and so on. And there is no doubt that with the pandemic, with climate change, with the recent revelations on Indigenous issues, etc., there are a lot of fronts on which we need the government to be very active. We need the government to essentially spend more, invest more, etc. And so it's going to be a really interesting election from that point of view. I mean, the polls show right now that the Liberals will do well, but it rather depends on how the campaign goes.
I'm curious your thoughts on how you figure Indigenous people and Indigenous issues are going to figure into party platforms.
Well, obviously, the government, for example, the Trudeau government has already promised more money for investigating the issue of the unmarked graves and so on various points. And I think that clearly the integration of Indigenous people into, or essentially enabling Indigenous self-government and then integrating Indigenous groups, nations into the rest of the economy, the rest of society, but on terms that Indigenous people would like. I think those would be other important issues. Going forward as well, it will be interesting to see. I don't see any clear signs of how this would emerge, but how exactly Indigenous issues will merge with the environmental issues will be another really, really interesting thing to watch.
Well, Professor Desai, thank you so much for joining us. And I guess we all better start gearing up, whether we like it or not, for this election, because it's going to happen.
Exactly. Thank you.